Introduction. It was near the end of a long day in October 1995 when the phone rang at my office desk. I had just finished presenting the third segment of a long investigative story that explained how a convicted triple murderer, acting as his own attorney, was abusing the court system to facilitate Mexican Mafia business. It was a court case that launched Operation Pelican Drop, an expensive, secret, top-security transport of more than a dozen of California's worst, high-risk inmates, including Rene Boxer Enriquez, whom I described as a notorious mob hitman. While chasing different organized crime stories in the past, I'd experienced my share of angry calls and more than a few death threats. I wasn't in the mood for any fresh ones, and I hesitated to pick up the receiver, but I did. A feisty woman on the other end of the line eviscerated me with a torrent of punishing words. She didn't like what she'd seen on TV, especially my portrayal of Rene Enriquez. It was not the only time I had featured him in a piece about the Mexican Mafia, also known as La M. I had first done a sweeping 5-part TV news expose and documentary in October 1991 about the resurgence of the Mexican Mafia and portrayed Enriquez as a brutal, heroin-addicted mafia hitman. During research on that piece, I'd interviewed an associate of Enriquez's and a recent mafia dropout who had both done a number of hits for the mob. It's interesting to note that those two hardened killers agreed to talk to me about any subject with one exception. They would not answer questions about Boxer Enriquez. He generated that kind of fear. In May 1994, I had described Boxer Enriquez as a Mexican Mafia killer during a 4-part in-depth expose I did on 18th Street, the largest criminal gang in Los Angeles. With an estimated 20,000 members, it was involved in extortion, drug dealing, and murder, and had close ties to the ruthless La M. Now the angry woman on the phone identified herself as Lupe Enriquez, Boxer's mother. She insisted he was a good-hearted son, not the murderous mobster I had described. I, on the other hand, was something less than pond scum for running down her beloved boy. I figured the last thing I needed to do was insult some notorious mafia guy's mother, and I tried to soothe her wrath. After about 20 minutes on the phone, she decided I was a nice man after all. Lupe Enriquez suggested that if I wrote to Rene, he would probably do an interview with me, so as to warn young people away from the evils of gang life. So I crafted a letter and mailed it to the maximum security prison in California. A month later, a 2-page response, handwritten on lined yellow legal paper, arrived from Pelican Bay State Prison. The letter expressed a bit of surprise that I had written to him. There was a polite refusal of my request for a TV interview with a little barb attached. I have no interest in being splayed across TV screens and dubbed a hitman, as you've seen fit to do so affectionately entitle me. But the letter writer made it clear I should feel no threat. Rest assured that I harbor no animosity for you whatsoever. In closing, I wish to thank you for your cordiality with which you treated my mother. I also appreciate the honesty which you displayed in your letter to me and your willingness to be frank. I place a higher degree of emphasis on a man's personal integrity. If you feel the need, please do not hesitate to contact me in the future. It was signed sincerely, Rene Enriquez, Boxer. In May 1997, Rene wrote me to ask if I could make some still photographs from videotapes I had shot at him during court appearances. He was locked down in the security housing unit, SHU, at Pelican Bay State Prison and was not allowed to take photos of himself. Rene wanted to send some relatively recent pictures to his family members. I complied with his request and joked that the courtroom photos looked better than mugshots. He quickly sent me a thank you note saying, "You're right, they sure beat mugshots." A happy face was sketched right next to the comment. In the following years, I received a Christmas card from Pelican Bay every year and always sent one in return. The messages were short holiday greetings wishing each other and our families the best. Usually, this legendary mobster wrote a little happy face for emphasis at the end of a humorous sentence. Then in the spring of 2003, I heard through contacts in law enforcement that Boxer Enriquez had dropped out of the Mexican Mafia. Frankly, no one could believe it. Several days later, I got a call at the office from John Enriquez, Boxer's father. He said Rene was interested in working on a book about his life in the Mafia, and he wanted me to write it. Would I be interested? the answer was yes. Days afterward, I was on the telephone with a man I knew quite a bit about as a robber, an extortionist, and a murderer. Through his violent behavior, he had climbed the criminal ladder into the upper echelon of a group widely recognized as California's leading organized crime threat, La M. We had never talked before. The Mexican Mafia is supposed to be a secret organization, and members who refer to themselves as carnales normally speak to the news media under penalty of death. Given the notes we had exchanged during a decade of limited correspondence, I was not surprised that he was articulate, engaging, and gregarious. I quickly found out that he disliked the nickname Boxer and wanted to be called Rene. I was warned that he was a manipulator, and that was true. He still reveled in his somewhat legendary reputation as a mobster, but it was clear from the outset that he had regrets. There was no doubt that he was bright, and at his best, he was charming and interesting. It was impossible to leave an encounter with Rene and not wonder what he could have done in life if he had not chosen a path of crime. The alter ego Boxer had dominated his existence, and it was clear he was trying to rediscover Rene. There was a relapse in his drug addiction after 4 years of sobriety, and early on, he went through a period of second-guessing his decision to leave the mob. Since 2002, Rene and I have met face-to-face for a total of about 30 hours at different lockup facilities, and we have spent endless hours on the telephone. During the last year of the book project, we talked with each other on almost a daily basis. Our conversations far outreached material for the book. We talked about life and what it meant to be a good man, a father, a son, a Christian. There were reminiscences about his friends in the Mexican Mafia, not just as mobsters, but as people. Our talks delved into the depths of evil, drugs, depravity, and death. As much as two people can when they communicate on the phone and during prison visits, we grew to know each other. I dare say, as shocking as this may seem to some, that we developed a friendship. There is nothing in Rene's criminal past that I admire. It is sad, discouraging, and frustrating to me that so many young people today are choosing lives that imitate the gangster lifestyle. Boxer Enriquez helped keep alive the myth that the Mexican Mafia is a fun, glamorous, prosperous, honorable way to live. In the years to come, I hope that Rene Enriquez will do everything he can to dispel that myth. In the end, it is up to him, and only him, to prove that he is a changed man. He is, in fact, another test case for redemption. A lot of what you read on these pages comes from first-hand accounts by Rene. However, much more comes from research that includes thousands of pages of legal documents, police reports, courtroom testimony, mafia debriefing reports, published news accounts, and personal interviews with law enforcement agents, prosecutors, defense attorneys, relatives, and confidential informants. In an effort to establish a consistent narrative flow, the information supplied by all the above is not always referenced specifically. The 18th century writer, thinker, and statesman Edmund Burke said, "All that is necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing." Rapidly approaching 40 years as a working news reporter, I have seen too many good men do nothing, not only in the underworld, but in the corporate world as well. It makes me sick. To those in the Mexican Mafia or gang associates who might be angered by this book, I ask simply, do you want your sons to be in that same life? I would argue that they should strive for more. There is no fulfillment in a life driven by drugs and fueled by blood and violence, looking over your shoulder all the time, wondering when your best friend will put a knife in your back or a bullet in your head. Also, prison walls can be forever, not just locking inmates in, but locking them out of a productive life they chose not to live. Certainly, some who find themselves on the other side of the law were driven by their mistreatment in their own homes while growing up. Others were drawn to the flame of evil through other perceived or true injustices. To them, I can only say, break the chain of mistreatment. A real man nourishes righteousness, not evil. Lupe Enriquez urged me to say at the beginning of this book that I am not here to blame anyone. I don't stand in judgment. I am trying to tell a story as honestly as I can about a man, his family, and a criminal organization, that shaped his life. I tell it in hopes that others can see the warning signs and learn from their mistakes and from their broken lives. It wasn't easy, she told me, for anyone involved. So there it is, Miss Enriquez.